She pretended to be his fiancée. For one night, he refused to end the pretense. The ballroom blazed with 10,000 candles, their light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and the jewels adorning every throat, wrist and ear in attendance. Arabella Sinclair stood near the wall of French doors that opened onto the terrace, trying to make herself as small and unobtrusive as possible, while the Dowager Countess of Blackmore held court from a gilt chair nearby. "Fetch me another glass of orgeat, girl," the Dowager commanded without looking at her. "And be quick about it. My throat is parched from all this tedious conversation." Arabella murmured her assent and slipped away, grateful for the excuse to move. She had been standing in the same spot for nearly 2 hours, invisible to the glittering throng that swirled past in silks and satins, present only to attend to the Dowager's endless demands. Her feet ached in the too tight slippers she had borrowed from the Countess's lady's maid, and her stomach reminded her insistently that she had not eaten since breakfast. But such was the life of a lady's companion. Arabella had learned long ago not to expect consideration, comfort, or even basic courtesy. She existed in the uncomfortable space between servant and gentlewoman, belonging fully to neither world. The servants resented her pretensions to gentility. The quality looked through her as though she were made of glass. She had become accustomed to invisibility. Most days, she even preferred it. The refreshment table sat at the far end of the ballroom, requiring her to navigate through clusters of laughing debutantes, gossiping matrons, and prowling gentlemen. Arabella kept her eyes down and her movements efficient, skirting the edge of a country dance and dodging a footman bearing a tray of champagne glasses. She had nearly reached her destination when a hand closed around her elbow. "Well, well, what have we here?" The voice was cultured, amused, and edged with something that made Arabella's skin prickle with warning. She turned to find herself looking up at a gentleman she recognized immediately, Lord Reginald Vance, whose handsome face and charming manner concealed a reputation that every woman in London society knew to fear. He was the sort of man mothers warned their daughters about, the sort whose invitations were never accepted by ladies of sense. "Forgive me, my lord." Arabella tried to pull her arm free, but his grip tightened. "I am on an errand for my employer and cannot stop to converse." "An employer?" His eyes travelled over her face and form with insulting deliberation. "Ah, you must be Lady Blackmore's little companion. I had wondered who that delicious creature hovering in the shadows might be. Not a debutante too old for that, aren't you? But far too pretty to be a proper servant." "Please release my arm, sir." "But I find myself captivated." He smiled, showing white teeth that somehow made Arabella think of wolves. "You cannot expect me to simply let you slip away when I have only just discovered you. Tell me your name, pretty thing." "My name is not your concern." Arabella's voice remained steady despite her racing heart. She had dealt with men like Lord Vance before, had learned to deal with them. Working as she did in great houses where she held no power and inspired no protection. But always before, she had been able to extricate herself quietly. Here, in the middle of a crowded ballroom, with his hand visibly gripping her arm, she was trapped in a different way. Any scene would reflect badly upon her, not him. "Come now, don't be coy." His grip shifted, pulling her slightly toward the nearby corridor. "Let us find somewhere more private to continue this conversation. I should very much like to know you better. And I should very much like you to remove your hand before I am forced to make a scene that will embarrass us both." Lord Vance laughed. "Who would believe you? The word of a paid companion against a peer of the realm? I think not, my dear. Now come along. I promise to make the experience pleasant for you." Real fear began to curl in Arabella's stomach. He was pulling her toward the corridor now, and she realized with growing horror that no one around them was paying the slightest attention. To casual observers, they might appear to be a courting couple stealing away for a private moment. No one would think to intervene. No one would even notice until it was too late. "Release me immediately," she said, louder now, desperation lending strength to her voice. "I do not wish to go with you. Your wishes are not my primary concern." They had reached the edge of the corridor, the ballroom's light beginning to give way to shadow, when a voice cut through the air like a blade. "There you are, darling. I have been searching everywhere." Both Arabella and Lord Vance turned. A man stood there, tall, dark-haired, with a face that might have been carved from granite for all the warmth it displayed. His evening clothes were impeccably tailored, his cravat tied in a style of elegant simplicity, and his grey eyes held all the warmth of a winter storm as they fixed upon Lord Vance's hand where it gripped Arabella's arm. "I beg your pardon?" Lord Vance's tone carried the incredulity of a man unaccustomed to being challenged. "My fiancée." The stranger's voice was perfectly pleasant and absolutely terrifying. "You appear to be touching my fiancée, Vance. I suggest you cease immediately." Something flickered in Lord Vance's expression, recognition, followed by calculation, followed by a wariness that surprised Arabella. Whoever this man was, he clearly commanded a respect that even someone of Lord Vance's arrogance could not ignore. "I was not aware you were engaged, Ashworth. A recent development." The man called Ashworth extended his hand toward Arabella, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that seemed to convey both command and reassurance. "Come, my dear. Lady Blackmore has been asking for you." Arabella did not hesitate. She wrenched her arm free of Lord Vance's slackened grip and placed her hand in the stranger's, allowing him to draw her to his side. His hand was warm and steady, his presence beside her solid and somehow safe in a way she could not explain. "My apologies for the confusion," Lord Vance said, though his tone suggested he was apologizing for nothing at all. "I had no idea the lady was spoken for." "Now you do." Ashworth's voice held the particular pleasantness of a man contemplating violence. "I suggest you remember it." Without waiting for a response, he turned and guided Arabella away, his hand moving from her fingers to the small of her back as he steered her through the crowd. He walked with purpose, his long legs eating up the distance until they reached an alcove partially concealed by a massive arrangement of hothouse flowers. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, finally turning to look at her fully. Arabella took a shaking breath. Yes. Thank you, my lord. I am not certain what would have happened if you had not— Vance is a predator." His jaw tightened. "He has ruined at least 3 women that I know of, and society continues to receive him as though his crimes were merely youthful indiscretions. I should have called him out years ago." "Why didn't you?" The question escaped before Arabella could stop it, and she immediately flushed with mortification. One did not ask such things of strangers, particularly strangers of obvious rank and power who had just rescued one from potential disaster. But he did not seem offended. If anything, a flicker of something like dark amusement crossed his features. "Because his cousin is married to my sister, and family complications have a way of staying one's hand." He paused, studying her face. "You are Lady Blackmore's companion." It was not a question, but Arabella nodded anyway. "Miss Arabella Sinclair. I am in her ladyship's employ for the season." "Sebastian Ashworth." He inclined his head. "Viscount Thornbury." Arabella's eyes widened. She knew the name. Everyone in London knew the name. Viscount Thornbury was infamous in society circles, though not for the reasons that made Lord Vance notorious. He was known for his cold demeanour, his cutting tongue, and his absolute indifference to the marriage mart, despite being one of its most eligible prizes. Wealthy, titled, handsome in a severe sort of way, and completely uninterested in acquiring a wife, he had inspired more than one ambitious mamma to pronounce him impossible and turn her attention to more receptive targets. "I see my reputation precedes me," he observed, watching her expression shift. That is to say, I have heard your name mentioned, my lord. All bad, I'm sure." He did not seem troubled by this. "Now, we have a problem." "A problem?" "I announced to Lord Vance that you are my fiancée. He is many things, but he is not stupid. By now, he has almost certainly mentioned this interesting development to at least 3 other people, and by the time the evening is over, the news will have spread to every corner of the ballroom." Arabella felt the blood drain from her face. "Oh, no." "I'm afraid so." Lord Thornbury's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his grey eyes. Irritation, she thought, though whether with her, himself, or the situation in general, she could not tell. "I acted on instinct, which is unlike me. I saw Vance pulling you toward that corridor, and reacted before I had time to consider the consequences." "I am grateful you did," Arabella said quickly. "Whatever complications arise, they are infinitely preferable to what Lord Vance intended." His jaw tightened again at the mention of what might have been. "Yes. Well, the fact remains that we must now decide how to manage the consequences. Can we not simply say it was a misunderstanding, a joke perhaps, or a case of mistaken identity?" "Possible, but problematic." Lord Thornbury leaned slightly against the wall, his arms folding across his chest in a posture that somehow made him look both more relaxed and more intimidating. "If we deny the engagement, Lord Vance will certainly make his version of events known. He will claim that you led him on, that you welcomed his advances until I interrupted, that you are using the false engagement story to cover your own indiscretion. Your reputation will not survive it." "My reputation is hardly of consequence," Arabella said, though the words tasted bitter. "I am a companion, my lord. I have no social standing to protect." "You have employment to protect. Do you think Lady Blackmore will retain a companion touched by scandal? You would find yourself without a position and without references, which would make securing future employment effectively impossible." Arabella had not considered this. The blood that had drained from her face now returned in a hot rush. Lady Blackmore was difficult and demanding, but the position paid well and provided a roof over her head. Without it, without references, she would have no options save returning to her parents' cramped cottage and adding another mouth to a table that already struggled to provide enough. "Then what do you suggest?" she asked, hating the note of desperation that crept into her voice. Lord Thornbury was silent for a long moment, his grey eyes distant as though calculating possibilities she could not see. Finally he spoke. "We maintain the fiction, for this evening at least. I will introduce you to a few key personages as my fiancée, ensuring that the version of events which spreads focuses on our attachment rather than Vance's predatory behaviour. Tomorrow I will have my solicitor draft an announcement for the papers stating that our engagement has been dissolved by mutual agreement, citing incompatibility of temperament or some such nonsense. These things happen. There will be gossip, but it will be the ordinary gossip of a broken engagement rather than the destructive gossip of scandal." "You would do this?" Arabella stared at him. "Announce an engagement you do not want, attach your name to mine even temporarily, all to protect a woman you do not know?" "I have 2 younger sisters." His voice was flat, but something in his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "If either of them were in your position, I would hope someone would show them the same consideration." Arabella did not know what to say. In her experience, men of Lord Thornbury's rank did not concern themselves with the welfare of women so far beneath them. They did not risk their own reputations to shield strangers from harm. They did not look at companions and governesses and see people worth protecting. "Thank you," she said finally, the words inadequate, but all she had to offer. He inclined his head. "Come. We should return to the ballroom before our absence becomes remarked upon. Remember, you are my fiancée. Look at me as though you are not entirely repulsed by the prospect." Despite everything, Arabella felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I shall endeavour to summon appropriate enthusiasm, my lord." "Sebastian," he corrected. "If we are engaged, you must call me Sebastian, and I shall call you—" He paused, one dark eyebrow rising in question. "Arabella. Arabella." He said her name as though testing its weight, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. "Very well. Shall we?" He offered his arm, and she took it, and together they walked back into the glittering chaos of the ballroom. The next hour was among the strangest of Arabella's life. Lord Thornbury Sebastian guided her through the crowded room with the ease of a man accustomed to navigating society's treacherous waters. He introduced her to a dizzying array of lords and ladies, earls and countesses, all of whom received the news of his engagement with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to poorly concealed irritation. "Thornbury engaged?" Lady Castlereagh's eyebrows climbed toward her elaborately styled hair. "I had quite given up hope of ever seeing you leg-shackled. Wherever did you find this charming creature?" "Miss Sinclair's family and mine have long been acquainted," Sebastian replied smoothly, a lie so polished that Arabella almost believed it herself. "I confess I have been quietly courting her for some months. Tonight seemed the appropriate moment to make our understanding public." "How romantic!" Lady Castlereagh's tone suggested she found it anything but, her sharp eyes examining Arabella with the intensity of a jeweller assessing a suspicious gem. "And what does your family think of the match, Miss Sinclair?" "They are delighted, my lady." Arabella forced warmth into her voice. "Though I confess the formal announcement came as something of a surprise. Sebastian does so love his dramatic moments." She felt his arm tense slightly beneath her hand and wondered if she had overstepped. But when she glanced up at him, she caught the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but close. "My fiancée knows me too well," he said. "I shall have to work harder at maintaining an air of mystery." They moved on, leaving Lady Castlereagh whispering urgently to the woman beside her. This pattern repeated itself a dozen times: introductions, congratulations, thinly veiled skepticism, and always Sebastian's steady presence at her side, his manner shifting seamlessly between the cold formality society expected and brief flashes of something warmer when he looked at her. "You are doing remarkably well," he murmured, as they paused near a potted palm to catch their breath. "I half expected you to flee in terror after Lady Jersey's interrogation." "Lady Jersey is a kitten compared to the Dowager Countess of Blackmore," Arabella replied. "I have been training for this sort of trial by fire for 5 years. "Have you?" Something in his expression sharpened with interest. "Tell me about your service with Lady Blackmore." "There is little to tell. I fetch things, carry things, listen to things, and pretend not to have opinions about things. It is not glamorous work, but it pays adequately and keeps a roof over my head." "You have opinions, then?" "Many. But no one pays me for them, so I keep them to myself." That almost smile appeared again. "A waste." "I suspect your opinions would be far more interesting than most of what passes for conversation in these ballrooms." "That is a low bar to clear, my lord." "Sebastian," he corrected again. "Sebastian." The name still felt strange on her tongue, too intimate for a man she had known for less than 2 hours. But the strangeness was not unpleasant. "I apologize. Old habits." "You need not apologize. This situation is peculiar enough without worrying about social niceties." He paused, his grey eyes scanning the crowd. "We should probably find Lady Blackmore. She will be wondering what has become of her orgeat." Arabella winced. "I had forgotten entirely. She will be furious." "Allow me to explain the situation. Even Lady Blackmore will not begrudge her companion an engagement to a viscount." You intend to tell her the truth? No. I intend to tell her the fiction, which she will believe because it flatters her vanity to have been patron to such an advantageous match. His tone was dry. Come, let us face the dragon. They found the Dowager Countess precisely where Arabella had left her, though the gilt chair was now surrounded by a flock of curious matrons, all chattering at once. The moment Lady Blackmore spotted them approaching, her expression shifted from irritation to something more calculating. "So it is true," she said, silencing the women around her with a wave of her bejewelled hand. "Thornbury has finally been caught, and by my own companion, no less. How delightfully unexpected." "Lady Blackmore," Sebastian bowed with perfect formality. "I must apologize for keeping Miss Sinclair from her duties this evening. I'm afraid our announcement has caused rather a stir." "So I have been hearing for the past quarter hour." The Dowager's eyes, sharp despite her advanced age, moved between Sebastian and Arabella with an expression that made Arabella deeply uncomfortable. "I confess myself astonished. You have been with me for 3 months, girl, and you never once mentioned an understanding with a viscount." "It was not my secret to share, my lady." Arabella kept her voice meek, her eyes appropriately downcast. "Lord Thornbury wished to wait for the appropriate moment to make our attachment known." "The appropriate moment being a crowded ballroom with half of London in attendance?" Lady Blackmore snorted. "Well, no matter. I suppose I shall have to find another companion, though where I shall find one at this point in the season, I cannot imagine." "I would not wish to leave you in difficulty, my lady." "Nonsense." The Dowager waved away her concern. "You cannot continue in my employ now that you are engaged to a viscount. It would be entirely improper." "No, no. You shall leave my service immediately. I shall have your things sent to—" She looked at Sebastian expectantly. "My aunt, Lady Cheswick, has agreed to serve as Miss Sinclair's chaperone until the wedding," Sebastian said smoothly, as though this had been planned all along rather than improvised on the spot. "Her belongings may be sent to the Cheswick townhouse in Mayfair." Arabella opened her mouth to protest. She could not possibly impose upon a woman she had never met. And besides, the engagement was meant to end within days. But Sebastian's hand pressed firmly against the small of her back, a clear signal to remain silent. "Excellent." Lady Blackmore nodded, clearly pleased to have the matter settled. "Lady Cheswick is a respectable choice. I shall have my housekeeper arrange everything in the morning." She turned her attention to the matrons surrounding her, effectively dismissing Arabella and Sebastian from further consideration. "I cannot stay with your aunt," Arabella hissed as soon as they were out of earshot. "The engagement is supposed to be dissolved within days. How will that appear if I am living in your family's household?" That complication had occurred to me. Sebastian guided her toward a less crowded corner of the ballroom, his expression unreadable. "However, the alternative was leaving you in Lady Blackmore's service while announcing a broken engagement, which would have made your position there untenable regardless. So instead, I am now homeless and unemployed. You are neither. You are engaged to a viscount, which means you will be housed and provided for until such time as we can unravel this tangle without destroying both our reputations." Arabella stopped walking, forcing him to halt as well. "This has grown entirely out of control. An hour ago, I was a companion with a secure position and no prospects. Now I am supposedly engaged to a man I have never met, living with relations I do not know, and facing a future I cannot begin to predict. This is madness." "Yes." Sebastian's agreement was surprisingly calm. "It is. But it is the madness we have before us, and we must deal with it as best we can." "How can you be so composed?" "Your life has been upended as thoroughly as mine." "My life has been upended before." Something flickered in his grey eyes, there and gone too quickly to identify. "I have learned that panic accomplishes nothing. We will manage this situation, Miss Sinclair. I give you my word." Before Arabella could respond, A new voice cut through their conversation. "Sebastian, my dear boy, I have only just heard the most extraordinary news." They turned to find a woman approaching, perhaps 60 years of age, with silver hair elaborately dressed and a gown of deep purple silk that spoke of both excellent taste and considerable wealth. Her face bore the remnants of what must have been striking beauty, now settled into an expression of avid interest that made Arabella's stomach clench with fresh anxiety. "Aunt Agatha," Sebastian's voice was carefully neutral, "I did not expect to see you this evening. I was not planning to attend, but Lady Morrison was simply begging for my company, and one cannot disappoint one's friends." Aunt Agatha's eyes fixed on Arabella with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. "And who is this? The rumour mill insists she is your fiancée, but I told Lady Morrison it could not possibly be true. My nephew, engaged, without a word to his family? Surely you have not become so estranged from us as all that." "It is quite true." Sebastian's hand found the small of Arabella's back again, and she took strange comfort in its presence. "Aunt Agatha, may I present Miss Arabella Sinclair, my intended. Arabella, my aunt, Lady Agatha Thornbury." "How do you do?" Arabella managed a curtsy, though her legs felt unsteady. "How do I do indeed?" Lady Agatha's laugh was bright and sharp. "I do extraordinarily well, Miss Sinclair, for I have long despaired of my nephew ever finding a bride. Tell me everything. How did you meet? When is the wedding? Have you settled upon a date? I shall insist upon hosting the engagement ball. Of course, no arguments, Sebastian. It is my right as your closest living aunt, and we must have the announcement in the papers by tomorrow morning at the latest." "That will not be necessary," Sebastian began. "Nonsense. A viscount's engagement must be properly announced. I shall send word to the Times personally. Lord Sebastian Ashworth, Viscount Thornbury, to Miss Arabella Sinclair of—" She paused, looking at Arabella expectantly. "Where is your family situated, my dear?" "Hampshire," Arabella managed, "near Winchester." "Charming. Miss Arabella Sinclair of Hampshire. It has a lovely ring to it. The announcement will appear day after tomorrow at the latest, and then we shall begin planning the ball. A month, I should think, gives us adequate time to arrange something suitably magnificent." "Aunt—" "Do not aunt me, Sebastian. You have been a miserable hermit for far too long, and now that you have finally found a young lady willing to take you on, I shall ensure the occasion receives the celebration it deserves." Lady Agatha beamed at Arabella. "You have no idea how pleased I am to meet you, Miss Sinclair. My nephew has been in desperate need of a wife, though he would never admit it. Someone to warm that cold heart of his. I can see already that you will do nicely." "I thank you, my lady." "Agatha. You must call me Agatha, my dear. We are to be family, after all." She seized Arabella's hand and squeezed it with surprising strength. "Now, I must circulate and share this happy news with everyone. Half the ballroom has not yet heard, and I shall take great pleasure in their astonishment. Sebastian, you will bring Miss Sinclair to call upon me tomorrow afternoon. We have much to discuss." She swept away before either of them could object, leaving a trail of whispers in her wake. "That," Sebastian said after a long moment of silence, "was not part of the plan. Your aunt is formidable. That is one word for her." He exhaled slowly, the first sign of strain Arabella had seen him display. "She has been attempting to marry me off for years. The prospect of an actual fiancé has clearly caused her to lose all sense of proportion. Can you not simply tell her the truth? Explain that the engagement is temporary, a matter of convenience rather than genuine attachment?" "I could." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "But I will not. Aunt Agatha is many things, but discreet is not among them. If she knew our engagement was a pretense, half of London would know within the week. My sisters' reputations would suffer by association with such a scandal, and their marriage prospects—" He stopped abruptly. "Their marriage prospects would be damaged," Arabella finished quietly. "Precisely." She understood then, with sudden clarity, why this cold, austere man had intervened to save a stranger from Lord Vance's predation. He was not acting from abstract principle or random kindness. He was a man who understood what it meant to protect women who depended upon him, who knew the consequences when that protection failed. His sisters, whoever they were, had shaped him into someone who could not walk past a woman being pulled toward her ruin. "What do we do?" she asked. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured, as though he were feeling his way through a darkened room. "The situation has become more complicated than I anticipated. Ending the engagement within days, as I initially proposed, will no longer be sufficient. An announcement in the papers, an engagement ball, these things cannot be undone quietly. If we break off our attachment immediately after such public acknowledgement, the gossip will be twice as vicious as anything Lord Vance might have spread." "Then what do you propose?" He turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I propose that we maintain the pretense for the duration of the season, 3 months. Time enough for the initial excitement to fade, for society to become accustomed to us as a couple, for the novelty to wear thin. Then, when we mutually agree to dissolve the engagement, it will be unremarkable. A disappointment, perhaps, but not a scandal." 3 months? Arabella's voice came out higher than she intended. "You wish me to pretend to be your fiancée for 3 months?" "I do not wish for any of this." His tone sharpened with frustration, then smoothed again into careful control. "But it appears to be the only path forward that does not result in disaster for one or both of us. You will live with my aunt, who will chaperone you appropriately. You will attend social functions as my intended. You will—" He hesitated, something flickering in his eyes. "You will allow me to provide for you as befits my fiancée. A wardrobe, an allowance, whatever you require." "I cannot accept such things. They would be charity, and I am not—" "They would be necessary for the maintenance of our fiction. A viscount's fiancée cannot appear in society in borrowed slippers and worn gowns. People would talk, and not in ways that serve our purpose." Arabella flushed, acutely aware of the too tight slippers and the gown that had been turned twice to hide its fading. "I see. Do not—" Sebastian broke off, then began again, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I do not mean to shame you. I only mean to point out that appearances matter in this world, whether we wish them to or not. If we are to carry off this pretense, we must do so thoroughly. Otherwise, we invite the very scrutiny we seek to avoid." She knew he was right. That was the worst part. Every practical bone in Arabella's body told her that his proposal made sense, that accepting his terms was the only sensible course of action. And yet something in her rebelled against it, the part that had spent 5 years learning that dependence on others led only to disappointment, that accepting help meant accepting obligations she could never repay. "What happens at the end?" she asked quietly. "When the season concludes and our engagement ends? I will have no position, no references, no prospects. Your aunt will have provided my wardrobe. I will be exactly where I was 3 hours ago, only older and with a broken engagement to my name." Sebastian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "At the end of the season, I will settle enough money upon you to live independently for a year, perhaps 2. Time enough to determine your next course. Whether that involves another position, establishment in a small household of your own, or some other option you have not yet considered, that will be your choice. You will not leave this arrangement worse off than you entered it. I give you my word." Arabella studied his face, searching for signs of deception or hidden motive. She found only the same austere composure he had worn all evening, but beneath it there, in the slight tension at the corners of his eyes, she saw something that might have been sincerity. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do all this for a stranger? I told you. My sisters—" "No." She shook her head. "That explains why you intervened with Lord Vance. It does not explain why you would continue to entangle yourself in my problems for 3 months, provide for me financially, and emerge from the experience with nothing but a broken engagement to show for it. What do you gain from this arrangement?" Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, at being challenged. Then, slowly, that almost smile appeared again. "You are cleverer than most people I encounter," he said. "Very well. I will be honest with you, Miss Sinclair Arabella, since you seem to value honesty. My aunt has been pressuring me to marry for years. My mother, before her death, made me promise to produce an heir. Society whispers that I am cold, unnatural, incapable of normal human feeling. An engagement, even a temporary one, silences those whispers. It satisfies my aunt's demands for action. It buys me 3 months of peace before I must once again fend off ambitious mothers and their simpering daughters. So I am useful to you. Yes, just as I am useful to you. A mutually beneficial arrangement, entered into freely by 2 adults who understand its terms." He paused. "Does that honesty trouble you?" Arabella considered the question. Did it trouble her? In truth, she found his candor refreshing. She had spent years navigating the lies and pretensions of society, the elaborate fictions people told themselves and each other to avoid admitting their true motivations. Here was a man who laid his cards upon the table and invited her to do the same. "No," she said finally, "it does not trouble me. I would rather a useful arrangement entered with clear eyes than a romantic fiction destined for disappointment." "Then we are agreed?" She took a deep breath. "We are agreed. 3 months. The duration of the season." 3 months. He extended his hand, and she took it. His grip was firm and warm, and for a moment their eyes met in silent acknowledgement of the strange bargain they had struck. "There is one more thing," Sebastian said, not releasing her hand. "Yes?" "You must endeavor to look somewhat less as though you are being led to execution when in my company. We are meant to be in love. The gossips will notice if you appear terrified whenever I approach." Despite everything, the absurdity of the situation, the uncertainty of the future, the chaos that had overtaken her carefully ordered life, Arabella felt a bubble of laughter rise in her chest. "I shall do my best," she managed, "though I confess, you do not make it easy. Has anyone ever told you that you smile as though the expression physically pains you?" Both his eyebrows rose. "They have not. Most people are too intimidated to comment on my facial expressions." "I am not most people." "No." Something shifted in his grey eyes, something warm and almost startled. "You are not." They stood there for a moment longer, hands still clasped, the ballroom swirling around them in a blur of light and music and whispered speculation. Arabella knew that she should pull away, that they had been standing too close for too long, that tongues were certainly wagging, but she found she did not want to move. Something about this man, this cold, complicated, unexpectedly kind man, made her feel as though she had finally found solid ground after years of treading water. "We should dance," Sebastian said finally, releasing her hand. "It is expected, and you look as though you could use the distraction. Is that your idea of a romantic invitation?" "I have never claimed to be romantic. Shall I try again?" He cleared his throat ostentatiously. "Miss Sinclair, would you do me the extraordinary honor of standing up with me for the next dance? I find myself quite overwhelmed by your beauty and can no longer bear to be parted from your company." Arabella laughed a real laugh, the first genuine one she had experienced in months. "That was terrible." "Yes, I told you I am not romantic." But his eyes were warm, almost amused, and when he offered his arm, She took it without hesitation. The orchestra struck up a waltz as they reached the dance floor. Coincidence or fate, Arabella could not tell. Sebastian drew her into his arms with the confidence of a man who had performed this dance 1,000 times, and she found herself following his lead without conscious thought. He was a good dancer, strong and sure, his hand warm at her waist. "You dance well," he observed. "Lady Blackmore's training, or something from your previous life?" "My mother was determined that all her children should have accomplishments, whether we had the means to use them or not. I can dance, play the pianoforte indifferently, sketch quite badly, and speak enough French to order dinner in Paris. A comprehensive education. A useless one, as it turned out. None of those skills have earned me so much as a shilling." "Perhaps not. But they serve you well tonight. You move through this ballroom as though you belong here." Arabella looked up at him, surprised by the observation. "Is that a compliment, my lord?" "An observation. I have met many women of higher rank who lack your composure." She was not sure what to make of that, so she said nothing. They danced in silence for several moments, weaving through the other couples, and Arabella found herself acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched his hand at her waist, her fingers resting on his shoulder, the whisper of space between them that somehow felt more intimate than any embrace. "Tell me about your sisters," she said finally, needing to break the charged silence. "What would you like to know? Whatever you care to share. If I am to be convincing as your fiancée, I should know something about your family." Sebastian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Their names are Eleanor and Catherine. Eleanor is 22, Catherine 19. They are my half-sisters, technically my father's children by his second wife, but I have never thought of them as anything less than fully mine. Eleanor is sensible and practical, perhaps too much so. Catherine is romantic and idealistic, perhaps too much so. They drive me to distraction, and I would cheerfully murder anyone who threatened them." Arabella smiled. "You love them." "I love them." The admission came simply, without embarrassment or qualification. "They are the only family I have left. My mother died when I was 12. My father and stepmother were killed in a carriage accident when I was 25. I have been responsible for Eleanor and Catherine ever since. That is a great deal of responsibility for a young man. It was. It still is." He guided her through a turn, his grip steady. "My father left considerable debts and a crumbling estate. I spent the first years after his death scrambling to keep us from ruin. The girls' dowries were nearly lost entirely. But you saved them. I recovered enough to provide them with respectable portions, yes. Not as much as they deserve, but enough to attract suitors who are not purely fortune hunters." His jaw tightened. "Eleanor is in her 3rd season with no serious prospects. Catherine will make her debut next year. My aunt insists that my own unmarried state is hindering their chances, that gentlemen see my refusal to wed and assume some defect that must run in the family. Is that why you wish to buy time with this Pretense? To improve their prospects?" He was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was careful. "Partly. My aunt's logic is not entirely without merit. An engaged man is less threatening to society than an unattached one. Families may be more willing to consider matches with my sisters if they believe I am soon to be settled myself." Arabella absorbed this. "You have built your entire life around protecting them. What else would I do?" The question seemed genuine, as though the alternative had never occurred to him. "They are my sisters. They depend upon me. I could not fail them." There was something in his voice, something fierce and tender and utterly unguarded, that made Arabella's chest ache. Here was a man the world saw as cold and unfeeling, and yet beneath that frozen exterior burned a devotion so intense it had shaped every choice he made. She wondered what it would feel like to be loved like that, to be someone's highest priority, their reason for fighting. "You will not fail them," she said quietly. "I am certain of it." His eyes met hers, and for a moment the ballroom fell away. There was only the music, the warmth of his hand, and the strange recognition that passed between them, two people who understood what it meant to carry burdens alone, to build walls for protection, to pretend strength when they felt only fear. "Thank you," he said, and she knew he meant it for more than just her words. The waltz ended. They stood for a moment in the sudden silence, hands still loosely clasped, and Arabella felt something shift between them, some barrier falling, some new territory being mapped. It frightened her, that shifting. She had agreed to a business arrangement, a pretense, a careful fiction that would end in 3 months and leave her life essentially unchanged. She had not agreed to this unexpected warmth, this unsettling sense that Sebastian Ashworth was not at all the man she had expected him to be. "I should return you to Lady Blackmore," Sebastian said, breaking the spell, "or rather, to wherever Lady Blackmore has decreed you should be. I believe my aunt has already begun making arrangements for your transfer to her household." "Already? But surely—" "My aunt is nothing if not efficient." His almost smile appeared again. "Do not look so alarmed. Lady Cheswick is considerably more pleasant than Lady Blackmore. She will treat you well." "How can you be certain? She does not know me. She may resent having a stranger thrust upon her household." "She may." He guided her toward the edge of the dance floor. "But she will not show it. My aunt has spent 60 years maintaining perfect social composure. Whatever she thinks of our arrangement, she will support it publicly." "And privately?" "Privately, she will ask me a great many questions that I shall deflect with varying degrees of success. Do not concern yourself with Aunt Cheswick. I will manage her." They had reached the alcove where Lady Agatha held court, surrounded by eager listeners who were clearly hanging on every word of her pronouncements about the upcoming engagement ball. Lady Blackmore was nowhere to be seen, presumably retired for the evening, her interest in Arabella's future having evaporated the moment it no longer directly served her needs. "There you are!" Lady Agatha spotted them and waved them over. "I have been telling everyone about our plans. The ball shall be held a month from tonight at Ashworth House. I have already begun composing the guest list. We must have at least 300, perhaps 4. Aunt, perhaps we might discuss the details tomorrow." Sebastian's voice was patient but firm. "Miss Sinclair has had a rather overwhelming evening and would benefit from rest." Yes, of course." Lady Agatha's sharp eyes examined Arabella with fresh attention. "The poor dear does look rather pale. Very well. I shall escort her to Martha's townhouse myself. No need for you to leave the ball, Sebastian." "I would prefer—" "Nonsense. You must stay and accept congratulations from anyone we might have missed. I shall take excellent care of your fiancé." She linked her arm through Arabella's before either of them could protest. "Come, my dear, we have much to discuss, and I find carriage rides an excellent opportunity for conversation." Arabella looked back at Sebastian as Lady Agatha began to tow her toward the ballroom's entrance. He stood where she had left him, tall and dark and inscrutable, his grey eyes following her progress through the crowd. At the last moment, just before she lost sight of him entirely, he inclined his head in a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or reassurance, or something else entirely. Then the crowd swallowed him, and Arabella was alone with Lady Agatha, being swept toward a future she could not have imagined when she woke that morning. The carriage ride was indeed filled with conversation, or rather, with Lady Agatha's extensive monologue about the Ashworth family history, Sebastian's many virtues and few acknowledged flaws, and her own theories about what had finally induced him to propose marriage. Arabella answered when required, deflected when possible, and tried not to think about the enormity of what she had agreed to. 3 months, 90 days, give or take. She would spend them pretending to love a man she had known for a handful of hours, living in a household that was not her own, wearing clothes she had not earned, and navigating a social world that had never welcomed her. At the end of it, she would walk away with enough money to survive for a year or two, and Sebastian would return to his solitary life with his reputation intact and his sister's prospects improved. It was a sensible arrangement, a practical one, the sort of bargain a woman in her position should be grateful to receive. So why, Arabella wondered, as the carriage rattled through London's dark streets, did she feel as though she had just stepped off a cliff into open air? "You are very quiet, my dear." Lady Agatha's voice cut through her reverie. "I hope I have not overwhelmed you with my chatter." "Not at all, my lady. I am merely tired." "Of course you are. A whirlwind engagement in the middle of a ball, it is enough to exhaust anyone." Lady Agatha patted her hand. "But you will find your footing soon enough. Sebastian is a good man. Whatever the gossips may say, he will take care of you." Arabella turned to look at her companion more closely. In the dim light of the carriage lamps, Lady Agatha's face had lost some of its animated brightness, revealing something softer and more perceptive beneath. "You love him," Arabella said, surprising herself. "He is my nephew. Of course I love him." But Lady Agatha's eyes were thoughtful. "I have watched him struggle these past 7 years, bearing burdens no young man should have to bear. He has grown hard in the bearing of them, cold, closed off from the world." She paused. "I have hoped for a very long time that someone would come along to thaw him, someone who could see past the ice to the man beneath. I am not certain I am that person." "No?" Lady Agatha's smile was enigmatic. "We shall see, Miss Sinclair. We shall see." The carriage came to a stop before an elegant townhouse, its windows glowing warmly against the night. A footman opened the door and helped them alight, and Arabella found herself ushered inside before she had time to prepare herself. Lady Cheswick, the aunt who would serve as her chaperone, was waiting in the drawing-room. She was perhaps 5 years older than Lady Agatha, with white hair and a face that had settled into lines of perpetual serenity. She rose as they entered and examined Arabella with calm, assessing eyes. "So this is Sebastian's fiancée," she said, her voice surprisingly warm. "Welcome to my home, Miss Sinclair. I hope you will be comfortable here." "Thank you, my lady. I apologize for the imposition." "Nonsense. Any woman brave enough to take on my nephew deserves whatever support I can provide." Lady Cheswick exchanged a glance with Lady Agatha that Arabella could not interpret. "Come, I will show you to your room. You must be exhausted." The room was beautiful, far more elegant than anything Arabella had occupied since her father's fortunes had fallen. A 4-poster bed with silk hangings, a cheerful fire burning in the grate, fresh flowers on the vanity. She stood in the centre of it, feeling out of place and overwhelmed and suddenly desperately close to tears. "A maid will come to help you undress," Lady Cheswick said from the doorway. "Tomorrow we will discuss wardrobes and schedules and all the practical matters. For now, rest. Things will seem less daunting in the morning." She closed the door gently, leaving Arabella alone. For a long moment, Arabella simply stood there, breathing. Then, slowly, she walked to the window and looked out at the dark London street below. Somewhere out there, Sebastian Ashworth was still at the ball, accepting congratulations on an engagement that existed only because he had been kind to a stranger in danger. 3 months, she reminded herself. A business arrangement, nothing more. But as she finally undressed and climbed into the too-soft bed, Arabella could not shake the memory of how his hand had felt at her waist during the waltz, warm and steady and unexpectedly gentle. Could not forget the way his eyes had softened when he spoke of his sisters, or the almost smile that transformed his severe face into something almost handsome. 3 months, she thought, as sleep began to claim her. Surely she could maintain her composure for 3 months. Surely she could guard her heart against a man who had already, without meaning to, begun to dismantle every wall she had built. 3 weeks into her false engagement, Arabella discovered that pretending to love Sebastian Ashworth was far easier than she had anticipated. Pretending not to love him was proving considerably more difficult. The realization crept upon her gradually, in moments she could not dismiss or explain away. It was there in the way her pulse quickened when his carriage arrived each afternoon to take her driving in the park. It was there in the warmth that spread through her chest when he remembered some small detail she had mentioned in passing, her preference for roses over lilies, her dislike of oysters, the name of the dog she had loved as a child. It was there, most dangerously, in the quiet contentment she felt simply sitting beside him in a crowded ballroom, knowing that of all the women present, she was the one he had chosen to claim. Even if the claiming was a fiction, even if it would end in 10 weeks' time. "You are wool-gathering again." Sebastian's voice cut through her reverie, and Arabella looked up from her untouched plate to find him watching her with that almost smile she had come to know so well. They were dining at Ashworth House, as they did twice weekly now, Sebastian, Arabella, his sisters Eleanor and Catherine, and usually Lady Cheswick serving as chaperone. Tonight, however, Lady Cheswick had been called away to attend a sick friend, and Lady Agatha had gleefully inserted herself in her place. She sat at the far end of the table, pretending to be absorbed in conversation with Catherine, while clearly eavesdropping on every word Sebastian and Arabella exchanged. "I was thinking about the engagement ball," Arabella lied smoothly. "Lady Agatha was asking about the menu this afternoon, and I confess I felt quite out of my depth. I have never planned an event of such magnitude." "Nor have I, which is why I have hired professionals to manage the details. Aunt Agatha enjoys the illusion of control, but the actual work is being handled by a very capable events secretary. You might have mentioned that before I spent an hour discussing the relative merits of lobster bisque versus turtle soup. And deprive you of the pleasure of my aunt's company? I would never be so cruel." Arabella bit back a smile. This was what she had come to treasure most about Sebastian, his dry wit, the way he used humour as a bridge between his frozen exterior and the warmth beneath. She had learned to read him over these past weeks, to see past the mask he wore for the world. She knew now that his coldness was a fortress built from necessity, not nature. She knew that beneath it lived a man of fierce loyalty, unexpected kindness, and carefully hidden passion. She knew, and she wished desperately that she did not. "Miss Sinclair." Eleanor's voice drew Arabella's attention across the table. Sebastian's older sister was watching her with an expression of thoughtful consideration that reminded Arabella uncomfortably of Lady Agatha. "I wonder if you might accompany me to Hatchard's tomorrow. I am in need of new reading material, and Catherine refuses to set foot in a bookshop." "Because bookshops are dull," Catherine interjected from beside Lady Agatha. "There is never anyone interesting in them, only old men muttering about Latin texts and ladies pretending to be intellectual." "I would be delighted to accompany you," Arabella said to Eleanor, ignoring Catherine's dramatic sigh. "I confess I have missed having access to a proper bookshop. Lady Blackmore's library was extensive but rather dated." "Improving texts and sermons," Eleanor guessed. "Almost exclusively. I believe I read every volume of Fordyce's sermons to young women at least 3 times. Eleanor laughed, a rare sound that transformed her usually serious face. "How you survived, I cannot imagine. Very well, tomorrow at 11. I shall send the carriage for you." "There is no need. Sebastian, that is, Lord Thornbury." Arabella stumbled over the name, still uncomfortable with the intimacy it implied. "Has already arranged to collect me for our drive in the park. He could drop me at Hatchard's beforehand." "Could he indeed?" Eleanor's eyes sparkled with something that looked suspiciously like mischief. "How convenient. Sebastian, you do not mind playing coachman for your fiancée, I trust?" "It will be my singular pleasure," Sebastian replied dryly. "Perhaps I shall even venture inside. I have been meaning to purchase that new treatise on agricultural improvements." Catherine groaned. "Agricultural improvements. You see why I avoid bookshops. Nothing but dullness and despair." "Some of us find value in dullness," Sebastian said. "It is restful, after the constant chaos of keeping you out of trouble." The siblings fell into their familiar pattern of affectionate bickering, and Arabella watched with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the grate. This was what she had been missing all these years: family, connection, the easy intimacy of people who loved each other despite their differences. She had never experienced it in her own childhood, not really. Her parents' marriage had been polite but distant, her relationships with her siblings cordial but never close. This teasing, this warmth, this sense of belonging was something new, something dangerous, because it was not hers. She was a guest in this family, a temporary addition that would be excised cleanly when the season ended. She had no right to feel at home here. No right to love these people who had welcomed her so readily, no right to love him. "You have gone quiet again." Sebastian's voice was low, meant only for her ears. The others had become absorbed in a debate about the merits of Lord Byron's latest publication, leaving him and Arabella in a bubble of relative privacy. "I am tired," she said. "The season is exhausting." "It is." He studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "But that is not what troubles you." "How do you know?" "Because you have looked tired before, and you do not look tired now. You look sad." Arabella's throat tightened. She had spent weeks learning to read him. She should have known he was learning to read her in return. "I am not sad," she said, which was almost true. "Only contemplative." "About?" She hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. "About how much I shall miss this, when it ends." Something flickered in Sebastian's grey eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. "Miss what, precisely?" "All of it. Your sisters, Lady Cheswick, even Lady Agatha, though I would never admit that to her face." She paused, then forced herself to add, "Your company." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning she had not intended to reveal. Sebastian was very still, his gaze fixed on her face with an intensity that made her pulse race. "Arabella, it is nothing." She looked away, breaking the charged moment. "Ignore me. I told you I was tired." "I rarely ignore you." His voice was quiet, and when she glanced back at him, his expression had shifted into something she could not quite identify. "I find that more difficult with each passing day." Before she could respond, before she could even begin to decipher what he meant, Lady Agatha's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Sebastian, you are neglecting your duty. Poor Catherine has been asking about the horses at Thornbury Park, and you are the only one who can properly describe them." Sebastian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Forgive me, Aunt. I was distracted." "By your lovely fiancée, I imagine." Lady Agatha's smile was knowing. "Understandable, but ill-mannered nonetheless. Catherine, dear, ask your brother about the new mare he acquired last month. He has been positively insufferable about her bloodlines." The moment passed. Sebastian turned to answer Catherine's questions, and Arabella was left alone with her racing thoughts and the echo of his words. "I rarely ignore you. I find that more difficult with each passing day." What had he meant? Was it a simple acknowledgement of their growing friendship? A polite nothing, the kind of thing gentlemen said to their fiancées without meaning anything by it? Or was it something more? Arabella pushed the question away, burying it beneath layers of practicality and common sense. It did not matter what Sebastian meant. It could not matter. Their engagement was a business arrangement, and she would do well to remember that before she allowed her foolish heart to hope for something more. The evening ended with Sebastian escorting her to Lady Cheswick's carriage, as had become their habit. They stood in the entrance hall of Ashworth House, momentarily alone while the servants fetched cloaks and called for the driver. "Thank you for dinner," Arabella said, filling the silence with convention. "It was a lovely evening." "It was." Sebastian paused, then added, "My sisters are very fond of you." "And I of them. They are remarkable young women." "They are." Another pause, longer this time. "Arabella, what you said earlier about missing this when it ends, please." She held up a hand, heart hammering against her ribs. "I should not have said anything. I was being maudlin. It will not happen again. But I want... my lady." A footman appeared at her elbow, holding out her cloak. "The carriage is ready." Arabella seized the interruption gratefully, wrapping the cloak around her shoulders and moving toward the door before Sebastian could finish whatever he had been about to say. She could not hear it, whatever it was. Could not bear the kindness or the pity or the gentle reminder that their arrangement had always been temporary. "Good night, Lord Thornbury," she said, formal now, the walls firmly back in place. He stood in the doorway as she descended the steps to the waiting carriage, his face unreadable in the lamplight. "Good night, Miss Sinclair." It was only later, alone in her borrowed bedroom with the candle burning low, that Arabella allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she had been fighting for weeks. She was falling in love with him, completely, hopelessly, disastrously in love with a man who had offered her nothing but a practical arrangement and would walk away when that arrangement concluded. She had known the risks when she agreed to this charade. She had been so certain she could protect herself, keep her heart safe behind the walls she had spent years building. But Sebastian had found his way through those walls without even trying, with his dry humor and unexpected kindness, with his fierce love for his sisters and his quiet acts of consideration. He brought her books he thought she would enjoy. He remembered that she hated the smell of lilies. He listened when she spoke, actually listened, as though her thoughts and opinions mattered. He looked at her sometimes with an expression that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. And none of it meant anything. None of it could mean anything. Arabella buried her face in her pillow and wept silently, thoroughly, for everything she wanted and could never have. The next morning dawned grey and drizzly, matching her mood with poetic precision. Arabella dressed carefully in one of the new gowns Sebastian had provided, trying not to think about how the soft blue muslin matched her eyes, how he had once mentioned offhandedly that blue suited her particularly well. She was being ridiculous. She knew she was being ridiculous. But knowing and feeling were entirely different things. Sebastian arrived precisely at 11, as promised, and Arabella descended to find him waiting in Lady Cheswick's entrance hall, his greatcoat spotted with rain and his dark hair slightly dishevelled from the wind. "Dreadful weather," he said by way of greeting. "Perhaps we should postpone the drive." "I am not made of sugar." Arabella kept her voice light, ignoring the traitorous flutter in her chest at the sight of him. "A little rain will not melt me." "No." His eyes travelled over her face with that disconcerting intensity she had never learned to bear. "I do not suppose it would." They drove to Hatchard's in companionable silence, the rain drumming softly on the carriage roof. Arabella kept her gaze fixed on the passing streets, acutely aware of his presence beside her, the warmth radiating from his body, the faint scent of sandalwood, and something uniquely him. Eleanor was waiting when they arrived, dressed in a sensible pelisse and looking annoyingly well rested. "I was beginning to think you had drowned," she said, ushering them inside. "Sebastian, you look like a half-drowned rat. Perhaps you should find a coffee-house while we browse." "I shall brave the horror of the bookshop," Sebastian replied. "I did mention that agricultural treatise." "You did. multiple times, with entirely too much enthusiasm. Eleanor linked her arm through Arabella's and began steering her toward the back of the shop. "Come, Miss Sinclair, let us escape before he begins lecturing about crop rotation." They spent a pleasant hour among the shelves, Eleanor proving to be a discerning reader with eclectic tastes. She recommended novels and histories, poetry and essays, and Arabella found herself relaxing into the simple pleasure of conversation with a like-minded woman. "I want to ask you something," Eleanor said finally, as they stood in a quiet corner, examining a display of newly published works. Arabella tensed. "Of course. Do you love my brother?" The question was blunt, unexpected, and utterly devastating. Arabella opened her mouth to deflect, to offer the practiced response she had prepared for such inquiries. "Of course I care for him. We have an understanding. The heart cannot be rushed," but something in Eleanor's direct gaze made the words stick in her throat. She stopped, started again. "Why do you ask?" "Because I have been watching you these past weeks, and I cannot determine the truth." Eleanor's voice was not accusatory, merely thoughtful. "Sometimes you look at him as though he hung the moon. Other times you seem almost frightened, as though you are trying to protect yourself from something. Perhaps I am simply an inconsistent person. You are the least inconsistent person I have ever met." Eleanor's lips curved slightly. "I have known women who pursued my brother for his title, his fortune, his connections. They are easy to identify. Their eyes calculate even as their lips smile. You are not one of them. But neither are you the love-struck maiden pretending indifference. You are something else entirely, and I cannot puzzle out what." Arabella was silent for a long moment, weighing her options. She could lie, maintain the fiction, protect the arrangement she and Sebastian had so carefully constructed. It would be the sensible thing to do. But she found suddenly that she was tired of being sensible. "I did not expect to care for him," she said quietly. "When this began, our engagement was not precisely conventional. Sebastian intervened in a difficult situation, and circumstances spiraled beyond what either of us anticipated. I had gathered as much." Eleanor did not seem surprised. "Sebastian has never been impulsive. For him to announce an engagement so suddenly, with no prior courtship, no family discussions, there had to be an unusual explanation." "You are not angry?" "Why would I be angry? You have made my brother happier than I have seen him in years. Whatever the origins of your attachment, the effect has been remarkable." Arabella stared at her. "Happy? Sebastian? Did you think I would not notice?" Eleanor's smile was gentle. "He smiles now. He laughs. He speaks of the future as though it holds something worth anticipating. Before you arrived, he was merely existing, managing his responsibilities, protecting his family, fulfilling his obligations. But living, hoping, he had forgotten how. I had not realized. No, I don't suppose you had. My brother is not easy to read, but I have known him all my life, and I can see the change." Eleanor paused, her expression growing more serious. "Which brings me back to my original question. Do you love him?" Arabella thought about lying, thought about deflecting, thought about the safe, sensible answer that would protect her pride and her heart. "Yes," she said instead, the word escaping before she could stop it. "God help me, but yes." Eleanor's smile softened into something approaching tenderness. "Then why do you seem so frightened?" "Because I have nothing to offer him." The words came now in a flood, weeks of suppressed emotion breaking through her carefully maintained composure. "I have no fortune, no connections, no great beauty or accomplishment to recommend me. I am a companion, Eleanor, a paid employee who fetches shawls and listens to complaints and pretends to be invisible. Men like your brother do not marry women like me, They take us as mistresses, perhaps, if we are foolish enough to accept, but marriage, a future, that belongs to women of rank and wealth, women who can match what they are given. What nonsense. Eleanor's voice was sharp. Do you truly believe Sebastian cares about fortune or connections? He should care. Society will care. Your family will care. My family consists of Sebastian, Catherine, and an assortment of elderly aunts who have no say in the matter. As for society, Eleanor made a dismissive gesture. Society will talk regardless. They always do. But Sebastian has never made a decision based on society's approval, and he is not likely to start now. You do not understand. I understand perfectly. You are afraid. Eleanor's eyes were kind but unflinching. You have convinced yourself that you are unworthy of love, and so you prepare yourself for rejection before it can happen. It is a clever form of self-protection, but it is not truth. Arabella felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. You cannot know. I know what I see. I see my brother looking at you as though you are the answer to questions he forgot how to ask. I see you looking at him with a warmth that goes far beyond practical arrangement. Eleanor reached out and took Arabella's hand. The question is not whether you are worthy of him. The question is whether you are brave enough to let yourself be loved. Before Arabella could respond, a commotion near the front of the shop drew their attention. A woman's voice, high and cultured, carrying over the usual murmur of browsers. Lord Thornbury! What an unexpected pleasure! Eleanor's hand tightened on Arabella's. Oh no! What? Who is Lady Cordelia Ashby? Eleanor's voice was grim. Sebastian's former fiancée. They moved through the shelves toward the front of the shop, where Sebastian stood near the entrance, his posture rigid, his face frozen into careful neutrality. Before him stood a woman of striking beauty, golden hair, porcelain skin, a figure draped in the height of fashion. She was smiling up at him with an intimacy that made Arabella's stomach clench. I had heard you were engaged, Lady Cordelia was saying as they approached. I confess I did not believe it at first. You were always so adamant about remaining unattached. People change, Lady Ashby. Sebastian's voice was perfectly polite and completely flat. I believe you know that as well as anyone. Something flickered across Lady Cordelia's beautiful face, hurt, perhaps, or anger. It was gone too quickly to identify. Indeed, change is the only constant in life. Her eyes moved past Sebastian to where Arabella and Eleanor had emerged from the stacks. And this must be the fortunate lady. I have been dying to meet her. Lady Cordelia Ashby, may I present Miss Arabella Sinclair? Sebastian's voice carried a warning that Arabella could not quite interpret. My fiancée. How do you do? Arabella managed a polite curtsy, though her heart was racing. Charmed, I'm sure. Lady Cordelia's eyes travelled over Arabella with an assessment that was not quite rude, but certainly not kind. I confess, Miss Sinclair, you are not at all what I expected. Sebastian always had such particular tastes. Tastes change, Arabella replied, echoing Sebastian's earlier words. Like people. Something sharpened in Lady Cordelia's gaze. How clever you are. I can see why Sebastian finds you amusing. I find her considerably more than amusing. Sebastian's voice held an edge that made even Lady Cordelia hesitate. If you will excuse us, we have an appointment to keep. Of course. I would not dream of detaining you. But Lady Cordelia made no move to step aside. I am hosting a small gathering next week, nothing elaborate, just a few intimate friends. You must both come. It would give us the opportunity to become better acquainted. I'm afraid our schedule is completely open on Thursday evening. Eleanor's voice was sweet but pointed. We would be delighted to attend, Lady Ashby. What time shall we arrive? Lady Cordelia's smile widened. Shall we say 8 o'clock? I do so look forward to it." She swept out of the shop, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and unspoken tension. Sebastian turned to his sister with an expression of barely contained frustration. "What in God's name was that?" "That was me ensuring we do not appear to be running away." Eleanor's voice was calm. If we had refused her invitation, she would have made certain all of London knew that Sebastian Ashworth was afraid to introduce his new fiancée to his old one. This way, we maintain control of the narrative. The narrative being that I am delighted to spend an evening in the company of the woman who— Sebastian stopped abruptly, his jaw tight. "The woman who what?" Arabella asked quietly. He did not answer. Instead, he turned and strode toward the door, leaving the books he had intended to purchase abandoned on a nearby table. Arabella looked at Eleanor, who sighed. "It is not my story to tell," Eleanor said. "But if you are to face Lady Cordelia at her own gathering, you should probably know it anyway." She paused. "Come, let us walk in the park, and I will explain." The rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean and glistening. Eleanor linked her arm through Arabella's as they walked, leaving Sebastian to follow at a distance, clearly lost in his own thoughts. "Lady Cordelia Ashby was Cordelia Wyndham when Sebastian knew her," Eleanor began. "The daughter of a viscount, beautiful, accomplished, everything a young nobleman could want in a wife. They were engaged for nearly a year. What happened? Our father died." Eleanor's voice was matter-of-fact, but Arabella could hear the old grief beneath. "Suddenly, unexpectedly. A carriage accident that killed both him and our stepmother. Sebastian inherited the title and the crushing debts our father had concealed from everyone, including his own family. I knew there were debts. Sebastian mentioned— He would not have mentioned the extent of them. At the time of our father's death, the estate was nearly bankrupt. Sebastian was forced to sell property, discharge servants, cut expenses to the bone. He worked himself half to death trying to salvage what he could." Eleanor's voice hardened. "And through all of this, Cordelia watched and waited and calculated." Arabella could guess what was coming, but she let Eleanor continue. 3 months after our father's death, Cordelia broke the engagement. She said she could not marry a man of uncertain fortune, could not risk her future on someone who might not be able to provide for her. She walked away without a backward glance, and married Lord Ashby within the year, a man 3 times her age, but possessed of a very reliable income. She abandoned him when he needed her most. Precisely. Eleanor's grip on Arabella's arm tightened. "Sebastian has never spoken of it, not to me, not to anyone. But I watched him change after Cordelia left. He became colder, harder, less willing to trust. He built walls around his heart and swore he would never let anyone pass them again." Arabella thought of Sebastian's careful control, his reluctance to show emotion, the way he held himself apart from the world. It all made terrible sense now. "And now she is back," Arabella said quietly. "Lord Ashby died last year, leaving her a wealthy widow. She returned to London this season, and I have watched her watching Sebastian at every event we attend. She made a mistake, and she knows it. He rebuilt his fortune without her. He is now more eligible than ever, and she wants him back." "Does he—" Arabella could barely force the words out. "Does he still care for her?" "I do not know." Eleanor's voice was honest. "He loved her once, I think, as much as he has ever loved anyone outside our family. Whether any of that feeling remains—" She shrugged. "You would have to ask him." Arabella looked back at Sebastian, walking several paces behind them, his face closed and distant. He had loved Lady Cordelia, had wanted to marry her, had been devastated when she left. Did he love her still? The thought was a knife in Arabella's chest. She had no right to jealousy. She was a pretend fiancée, a convenient arrangement, nothing more. but the thought of Sebastian carrying a torch for that cold, calculating woman made her want to weep, or scream, or do something equally undignified. "We should return home," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "The weather looks uncertain." Eleanor studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. I'll fetch Sebastian." The drive back to Lady Cheswick's was silent, the earlier ease between them shattered by Lady Cordelia's appearance and all it implied. Arabella sat very straight, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on nothing. "Arabella." Sebastian's voice was quiet, hesitant in a way she had never heard before. "What Eleanor told you, she told me nothing that concerns me." Arabella kept her voice light. "Your past is your own business. I have no claim on it. You have every—" He stopped, frustration evident in the set of his jaw. Eleanor should not have spoken of matters she does not fully understand. She was trying to help, to prepare me for Thursday evening. Thursday evening need not happen. I will send our regrets. No. Arabella finally turned to face him, drawing on every ounce of composure she possessed. Eleanor was right. If we refuse the invitation, Lady Cordelia wins. She will have shown that she still has power over you, that her presence disturbs you enough to make you flee. She paused. I will not give her that satisfaction. Sebastian stared at her, something unreadable moving behind his grey eyes. You would do this? Face her in her own home, knowing what you now know? I would do considerably more than that. The words came from somewhere deep inside Arabella, somewhere fierce and protective that she had not known existed. You saved me from Lord Vance when you had no reason to help a stranger. You have given me a home, a place, a purpose, when I had lost all three. You have treated me with more kindness and respect than I have received from anyone in my life. She held his gaze, willing him to understand. I will not stand by while some calculating harpy makes you feel unworthy. You deserve better than that. The silence stretched between them, charged with something that made Arabella's pulse race. Sebastian's eyes never left her face. You believe that, he said finally. You actually believe I am worthy of defense. Why would I not? It is the truth. No one has ever... He broke off, shaking his head. You are quite remarkable, Miss Sinclair. Has anyone ever told you that? Not lately. Then allow me to be the first. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. You are remarkable, and I am more grateful for you than I know how to express. Arabella's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him everything, that her feelings went far beyond gratitude, that she lay awake at night thinking about him, that the thought of their arrangement ending filled her with a grief she could barely contain. But the words would not come. She could not risk it, could not bear the pity she might see in his eyes, if he knew the truth. We should prepare for Thursday, she said instead, gently withdrawing her hand. Lady Cordelia strikes me as a woman who plans her battles carefully. We should do the same. Sebastian's expression flickered disappointment, perhaps, or something else, but he nodded. You are right. We shall face her together. Together. The word echoed in Arabella's heart long after she had retreated to the safety of her borrowed room. The night of Lady Cordelia's gathering arrived with a swiftness that left Arabella breathless. She had spent days preparing, choosing the perfect gown, rehearsing casual remarks, steeling herself for whatever games the widow might play. But as she descended Lady Cheswick's staircase to find Sebastian waiting in the entrance hall, all her careful preparation fled. He was wearing black as usual, but there was something different about him tonight. A tension in his shoulders, a darkness in his eyes that spoke of battles fought and not quite won. He looked up as she appeared, and for a moment his mask slipped entirely. "You look beautiful," he said, and the words were so simple, so unguarded, that they stole her breath. "Thank you." She wished she could say more, could tell him how handsome he looked, how the sight of him made her heart ache with longing. But Lady Cheswick was hovering nearby, and the servants were watching, and there were boundaries that could not be crossed. The carriage ride to Lady Cordelia's townhouse was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Arabella took Sebastian's arm and allowed him to lead her inside, her head held high despite the nervousness churning in her stomach. Lady Cordelia's gathering was indeed intimate, perhaps 30 guests, all clearly selected for maximum social impact. Every eye in the room turned toward them as they entered, and Arabella felt the weight of collective scrutiny like a physical pressure. "Lord Thornbury, Miss Sinclair." Lady Cordelia glided toward them, stunning in a gown of deep red that set off her golden beauty to perfection. "How delightful that you could join us." "Lady Ashby." Sebastian's bow was perfectly correct and absolutely frigid. "Your home is lovely. You always did appreciate beautiful things." Her smile was knowing, intimate in a way that made Arabella's hands clench. "Come, let me introduce you to my other guests. I'm sure they are all dying to meet your charming fiancé." The next hour was an exquisite form of torture. Lady Cordelia kept them close, steering conversations with subtle expertise toward topics that excluded Arabella or highlighted her inferior position. She mentioned parties Sebastian had attended years ago, with pointed reminders that she had been at his side. She asked about estates Arabella had never visited, horses Arabella could not afford to ride, connections Arabella did not possess. And through it all, she watched. Her blue eyes tracked every interaction between Sebastian and Arabella, cataloguing responses, searching for weaknesses. She was hunting, Arabella realized, hunting for the crack in their armor. "I must say," Lady Cordelia remarked during a lull in conversation, "I find your attachment rather extraordinary, Miss Sinclair. Sebastian was always so particular about the women he favored. Tell me, how exactly did you capture his attention?" The question was delivered with a smile, but the barb was unmistakable. Arabella felt Sebastian stiffen beside her. "I believe Lord Thornbury prefers to speak for himself on matters of his own heart," Arabella replied smoothly. "Perhaps you should ask him directly." Lady Cordelia's smile thinned. "I am asking you. Women understand these things better than men, do we not? The careful calculations, the strategic positioning." "Some women, perhaps." Arabella met her gaze squarely. "I confess I have never been skilled at calculation. I find honesty more efficient." "Honesty?" Lady Cordelia laughed, a pretty sound with an ugly edge. "How refreshing. And naive." "Naivety implies a lack of understanding." Arabella's voice was calm, though her heart pounded. "I prefer to think of it as choosing not to play games I find distasteful." Something flashed in Lady Cordelia's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at finding claws where she had expected compliance. "You are more interesting than I anticipated, Miss Sinclair. Sebastian does have a gift for finding unconventional companions. I prefer to think of myself as his fiancée, but if unconventional is the best compliment you can offer, I shall accept it." The tension between them crackled like lightning before a storm. Around them, other guests had fallen silent, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Lady Cordelia's perfect composure showed the faintest crack. "Sebastian?" Her voice changed, becoming softer, more intimate. "Remember when we used to argue about nothing, just for the pleasure of making up afterward? I have missed that. Missed us." Arabella felt Sebastian's arm turn to stone beneath her hand. She waited for him to respond, to rebuff the overture, to make clear that whatever had existed between them was dead. He said nothing. The silence stretched, terrible and damning. Lady Cordelia's smile returned, triumphant now, sensing victory. "Perhaps," she continued, "we should find a moment to speak privately. There is so much left unsaid between us, and I find I have things to tell you that—" "Lady Cordelia." Arabella's voice cut through the honey-sweet manipulation like a blade. "I believe you mistake silence for agreement. Allow me to correct that impression." She stepped forward, positioning herself directly between Sebastian and his former fiancé. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it, but her voice remained steady. "You speak of what you have missed: arguments, reconciliations, the pleasure of making up. But you forget that you chose to walk away from all of that. You abandoned Sebastian when he needed you most, and you did it for money." Arabella's smile was sweet and utterly merciless. "I may be unconventional, Lady Ashby, but I know the value of loyalty, and I know the worthlessness of regret that comes only after the fortune has been rebuilt." Lady Cordelia's face went white. "How dare you? I dare because I have nothing to lose." Arabella's voice dropped, soft enough that only Lady Cordelia could hear. "You calculated wrong 7 years ago, and you know it. That must be a bitter pill for a woman who prides herself on her calculations. But Sebastian is not a prize to be reclaimed because you have reconsidered your options. He is a man who deserves better than a woman who values him only for what he can provide." She stepped back, once again at Sebastian's side. "Now, if you will excuse us, I believe we have stayed long enough. The evening has been educational." She turned without waiting for a response and walked toward the door, trusting Sebastian to follow. Her legs trembled beneath her gown, her hands shook with the aftermath of adrenaline. She had just made an enemy of one of society's most influential widows. She had probably destroyed whatever reputation she had managed to build, but she had also defended the man she loved, and she could not bring herself to regret it. Sebastian caught up with her in the entrance hall, his hand closing around her elbow. "Arabella, please." Her voice broke slightly. "Can we leave first?" "I need air." He did not argue. Within moments they were in the carriage, the door closing on the curious faces of Lady Cordelia's guests. Arabella pressed herself into the corner of the seat, trying to control her breathing, waiting for the recriminations to begin. They did not come. Instead, Sebastian reached across the darkness and took her hand. His grip was warm, steady, anchoring. "That," he said quietly, "was the most extraordinary thing I have ever witnessed." Arabella looked up, startled. "I may have destroyed your standing in society." "My standing in society can go hang." His voice was rough, uneven. "You defended me, publicly, fearlessly, knowing it might cost you everything. No one has ever—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Arabella, no one has ever stood for me like that. Someone should have." The words came out fierce, protective. "Someone should have told Cordelia Ashby years ago that she did not deserve you, that walking away from you was the worst mistake of her miserable, calculating life, that you are worth more than—" She did not finish the sentence. Sebastian's mouth found hers in the darkness, swallowing her words, and she forgot how to speak entirely. The kiss was not gentle. It was hungry, desperate, 7 years of frozen emotion thawing all at once. His hand came up to cup her face, and she clutched at his coat, and for one perfect, endless moment, nothing existed but the two of them and the fire they had been denying for weeks. Then the carriage jolted over a rut, and reality crashed back in. Sebastian pulled away, breathing hard. In the dim light from the passing street lamps, Arabella could see his expression stunned, undone, more open than she had ever seen it. "I should not have—" he began. "Don't." She pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping the apology before it could form. Don't take it back. Please. Arabella. His voice was hoarse. I am not. This was not. I know. She forced herself to withdraw, to create distance between them before she did something unforgivable like beg him to kiss her again. It was the emotion of the moment. You were grateful for what I said. It doesn't have to mean anything. Is that what you think? He caught her wrist as she pulled away. That it meant nothing? I think that we made an arrangement. Her voice wavered despite her best efforts. A practical arrangement that concludes in 7 weeks. I think that letting one kiss change the terms of that arrangement would be foolish for both of us. And if I want to be foolish? The words hung in the air between them, impossible and irresistible. Arabella's heart screamed at her to accept, to throw caution aside and tell him everything she felt. But her head, her sensible, practical, self-protective head, knew better. Then you should wait until morning, she said softly, and see if you still feel the same in the cold light of day. The carriage rolled to a stop outside Lady Cheswick's townhouse. Arabella did not wait for the footman. She opened the door herself and fled up the steps, leaving Sebastian alone with the wreckage of her composure and the echo of a kiss that had changed everything. She did not sleep that night, could not sleep, with the memory of his lips against hers replaying endlessly in her mind. She told herself he would reconsider by morning, that gratitude and emotion had temporarily overwhelmed his judgment, that when the sun rose, he would return to his cold, careful self. She almost believed it. But when morning came, so did a letter, delivered by Sebastian's own footman, sealed with his family crest, and containing only a few lines in his precise, elegant hand. My dearest Arabella, it is morning. The light is cold. I have not changed my mind. I find that I do not want our arrangement to end. I find that I do not want you to leave. I find that I have been a fool for weeks, telling myself that what I felt was gratitude or practical consideration, when the truth has been staring me in the face since the night we met. I love you. Not because you defended me, though God knows that was extraordinary. I love you because you are kind and brave and clever and fierce, because you make me laugh, because you challenge me, because you see the man I am beneath the mask I wear for the world. You asked me once what I would gain from our arrangement. I told you peace and time and the satisfaction of my aunt's demands. I did not tell you the truth that I was already gaining something far more valuable. I was gaining you. I have no right to ask for anything. Our agreement was clear, and I have no wish to impose obligations you did not accept. But I find I cannot be silent any longer. I love you, Arabella Sinclair. I have loved you for weeks, and if there is any chance that you might come to feel the same, I am willing to wait forever to find out. Yours completely, Sebastian. Arabella read the letter 3 times, then she pressed it to her heart and wept, but this time the tears were not from grief, they were from hope. Arabella stood at her window for what felt like hours, Sebastian's letter clutched in her trembling hands, reading those impossible words over and over until she had memorized every curve of his handwriting, every carefully chosen phrase. He loved her. Sebastian Ashworth, Viscount Thornbury, the man society called cold, the man who had sworn never to risk his heart again, loved her. And she was terrified, not of his feelings. Those she trusted somehow, despite every rational argument against it. Sebastian was not a man who spoke carelessly. If he declared love in writing, he meant it with every fibre of his guarded soul. No, what terrified her was the vast, yawning chasm between what she wanted and what she believed she deserved. She wanted to run to him, wanted to throw herself into his arms and confess everything, that she had loved him almost from the beginning, that every moment apart from him felt like exile, that the thought of their arrangement ending had been slowly destroying her from within. She wanted to be his, truly his, without pretense or practical considerations, or the constant fear that she was not enough. But the voice in her head, the one that had whispered unworthiness since childhood, the one that had grown louder with every year of service and invisibility, that voice screamed warnings she could not ignore. He was a viscount. She was a companion. He moved in circles of power and privilege. She had spent years fetching shawls and pretending not to exist. Their engagement had begun as a convenient fiction, and convenient fictions did not transform into fairy tales simply because one wished hard enough. Did they? A knock at her door made her jump. Lady Cheswick's voice came through the wood, gentle but insistent. "Arabella, dear, Lord Thornbury's carriage has arrived. He is waiting in the drawing-room." Arabella's heart seized. He was here, already. She looked down at herself, still in her morning dress, her hair barely pinned, her eyes surely red from crying. She looked nothing like a woman prepared to receive a declaration. She looked like what she was, a terrified creature caught between hope and despair. "Tell him—" Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Tell him I will be down shortly." She heard Lady Cheswick's footsteps retreat, and she forced herself to move. Hands shaking, she changed into a simple day dress of pale green, one of the many Sebastian had provided. She pinned her hair with more care than usual, though stray copper curls still escaped to frame her face. She splashed cold water on her cheeks to reduce the evidence of tears, and all the while his words echoed in her mind. "I love you. I have loved you for weeks. If there is any chance that you might come to feel the same." She descended the stairs on legs that felt made of water rather than bone. The drawing-room door stood open, and she could see him before he saw her standing at the window, his back to the room, his posture rigid with tension. He wore no coat, as though he had thrown on the minimum acceptable clothing before racing to her side. His dark hair was slightly dishevelled. He looked, she realized with a pang, as though he had slept as little as she had. He must have sensed her presence, because he turned before she could speak. His grey eyes found hers immediately, and what she saw in them made her breath catch vulnerability, hope, fear. All the emotions she was feeling reflected back at her from the man who had taught himself never to show emotion at all. "Arabella." Her name was a prayer on his lips. "You came down. I was not certain you would. Did you think I would hide in my room?" She moved into the drawing-room, closing the door behind her with hands that would not stop trembling. "After receiving a letter like that? I thought—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought you might need time to formulate a gentle rejection, to compose the words that would let me down kindly. Is that what you expect? A rejection? It is what I have prepared myself for." His voice was steady, but she could see the cost of that steadiness in the white-knuckled grip of his hands at his sides. "You were very clear last night. Our arrangement was practical. Letting one kiss change the terms would be foolish. I understood your meaning perfectly. You were reminding me of the boundaries I had transgressed. Sebastian, please." He held up a hand, stopping her. "Let me finish. I need to say this, and if I stop, I may not find the courage again." He drew a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep within him. "I wrote that letter in the small hours of the morning, when the darkness makes one brave or perhaps simply reckless. I meant every word. I will not take them back. But I am aware that I have placed you in an impossible position. You are living in my aunt's home, wearing clothes I have provided, dependent upon my goodwill for your very security. If I declare love under such circumstances, how can you possibly respond freely? How can you trust that any answer you give is not influenced by the power I hold over your situation?" Arabella stared at him, struck by the unexpected direction of his speech. He was not demanding an answer. He was not pressing his advantage. He was protecting her. Even now, Even in this moment when his heart lay exposed and bleeding, his first thought was for her freedom. "I have made arrangements," he continued, pulling a folded document from his pocket. "This is a letter of credit, drawn upon my bank, in the amount I promised you at the end of our arrangement. 2 years' income, enough to establish yourself independently wherever you choose. It is yours now, regardless of what happens between us. Whether you accept my feelings or reject them, whether you choose to continue our engagement or end it this morning, your future is secure." He laid the document on a nearby table. "Now you can answer me honestly. Now you can tell me the truth without fear of consequences." The tears Arabella had fought to contain spilled over, streaming down her cheeks. She had spent her entire adult life being overlooked, undervalued, treated as a convenience rather than a person. And here was this man, this extraordinary, complicated, deeply good man, giving up his only leverage over her because he could not bear to have her answer influenced by anything other than her own heart. "You impossible man," she whispered. His face went pale. "I see. Then you do not—" "I love you." The words burst out of her, uncontained and unstoppable. "I love you so much it terrifies me. I have loved you for weeks, lying awake at night thinking about you, watching you with your sisters, and aching to be part of your family, dreaming of a future I told myself I could never have. I have been miserable, Sebastian, utterly miserable, because I was so certain you could never truly want someone like me." He was staring at her, as though she had suddenly begun speaking in tongues. "You what?" "I love you." She laughed through her tears, a sound caught somewhere between joy and hysteria. "Did you think you were the only one suffering in silence? I have been walking around for weeks with my heart in my throat, trying to pretend that our arrangement was purely practical when every moment with you made me want more. When you kissed me last night, I thought if I gave in, if I let myself hope, I would only be devastated when you came to your senses and remembered that viscounts do not marry penniless companions." "Arabella." He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears with infinite gentleness. "Look at me, please." She looked. His grey eyes were bright with emotion, all his careful walls demolished, nothing between them but truth. "I do not care about your fortune or your lack of it," he said fiercely. "I do not care that you were a companion, or that your father lost his money, or that society may whisper about the mismatch. I care about you, your wit, your courage, your kindness. I care about the way you make me laugh when I had forgotten how. I care about the way you defended me against Cordelia, like a lioness protecting her territory, when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. I care about waking up every morning and knowing I will see you, and dreading the day when our arrangement would end and I would have to watch you walk away." "I never wanted to walk away," she admitted. "I was simply too afraid to stay." "Are you still afraid?" She considered the question honestly. The voice of unworthiness was still there, whispering in the back of her mind. It probably always would be. But it was quieter now, drowned out by something stronger, the look in Sebastian's eyes, the warmth of his hands on her face, the absolute conviction in his voice when he said he loved her. "Yes," she said. "I am still afraid, but I find that I am more afraid of losing you than of anything else." His smile, his real smile, not the almost smile she had come to know, broke across his face like sunrise. It transformed him, made him look younger, softer, incandescently happy. "Then stay," he said. "Marry me. Not because of an arrangement or a pretense or a practical consideration, but because you want to. Because I love you, and you love me, and that is the only reason that has ever mattered. She hesitated, one last flicker of doubt. Your aunt will be furious. Lady Agatha has been planning an elaborate wedding to an imaginary fiancé. When she learns the engagement was false from the beginning, my aunt will be delighted to learn that the imaginary engagement has become real. She never wanted the elaborate wedding for its own sake. She wanted me to be happy. Sebastian's hands slid from her face to her shoulders, then down her arms to catch her hands in his. You make me happy, Arabella. Happier than I ever thought I could be. I spent 7 years convincing myself that I was better off alone, that love was a weakness I could not afford. You have proven me utterly wrong, and I have never been more grateful to lose an argument. Arabella laughed, the sound watery but genuine. You are not losing an argument. You are winning quite thoroughly, I think. Am I? His eyes searched her face. You have not actually said yes. She had not, she realized. In all the emotion, all the tears and declarations, she had not spoken the word that would bind her to him forever. And suddenly she wanted to claim him as thoroughly as he was claiming her. Yes, she said. Yes, Sebastian, I will marry you, not as a pretense or an arrangement, as your wife, for better or worse, for the rest of our lives. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the desperate kiss in the carriage. This was slow, tender, a promise sealed with the press of lips. She melted into him, her hands rising to rest against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her palms. He held her as though she were precious, as though he could not quite believe she was real. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. I should do this properly, he murmured. Get down on one knee, procure a ring, ask your father's permission. My father will be so astonished that anyone has proposed that he will grant permission before you finish the sentence. She smiled up at him. And I do not need a grand gesture. I have the man. The rest is merely decoration. Nevertheless, you shall have a ring. His voice held a note of determination that she was coming to recognize. My mother's, if you will accept it. I have kept it all these years, telling myself I was saving it for some hypothetical future, when in truth, I think I was waiting for someone worthy of wearing it. Tears pricked at her eyes again. Sebastian, you are worthy, he said firmly, as though he could read her thoughts. You are more than worthy. You are everything I never knew I needed, and I intend to spend the rest of my life ensuring you know it. The door burst open, making them both jump apart. Eleanor and Catherine stood in the doorway, Lady Agatha hovering behind them with an expression of poorly concealed glee. We heard shouting, Catherine announced, clearly unrepentant about the interruption. Happy shouting, it sounded like. Are we to have a wedding? You are incorrigible, Sebastian told his youngest sister, but there was no heat in his voice. Yes, you are to have a wedding. A real one this time. I knew it, Catherine crowed. I told Eleanor weeks ago that you were genuinely in love. She said I was being romantic, but I was right. I am always right about these things. You are frequently wrong about these things, Eleanor corrected, but she was smiling as she crossed the room to embrace Arabella. Welcome to the family, properly I mean, as a sister rather than a guest. Arabella hugged her back, overwhelmed by the warmth of the welcome, by the easy acceptance she had done nothing to earn. Thank you. I will try to be worthy of the honor. You already are. Eleanor pulled back, her eyes suspiciously bright. Anyone who can make my brother smile like that has more than earned her place among us. Lady Agatha swept into the room, all silk skirts and triumphant energy. This is excellent news. I shall have to revise the guest list for the engagement ball. No, on second thought, the guest list stands. Everyone must witness this. The frozen Lord Thornbury, brought low by love at last. It is positively poetic. I was not frozen, Sebastian protested. merely cautious. You were an absolute glacier, my dear boy, and we all knew it. Lady Agatha patted his cheek with affectionate condescension. But glaciers melt eventually, given sufficient warmth. Miss Sinclair, or may I call you Arabella now? Arabella has provided that warmth, and I, for one, am deeply grateful. As am I, Lady Cheswick added, appearing in the doorway, though I confess I suspected something like this from the beginning. The way you looked at each other was rather difficult to miss. Arabella felt herself blushing. We were that obvious? To those with eyes to see. Lady Cheswick smiled serenely. Young people always think they are being so subtle. They never are. The rest of the day passed in a blur of joy. Sebastian sent word to his solicitor to begin the legal preparations for the wedding. Lady Agatha commandeered the engagement ball planning with renewed fervour. Eleanor and Catherine peppered Arabella with questions about every aspect of her life, eager to know their future sister in full. And through it all, Sebastian stayed close, a hand at her elbow, a whispered word in her ear, a glance across the room that spoke volumes. When evening fell and the household finally dispersed to their own corners, Sebastian drew Arabella into the small study where they could be private. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. The ring was beautiful, a delicate band of gold set with a single sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was old, clearly an heirloom, but it had been kept with such care that it gleamed like new in the candlelight. It was my grandmother's before it was my mother's, Sebastian explained, turning it in his fingers. My mother wore it until the day she died. She told me once that the sapphire was the colour of hope. She chose it because she wanted to carry hope with her always. It's beautiful, Arabella whispered. May I? He gestured to her hand, and she extended it, watching as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Now it is official, he said, his voice rough. You are mine, and I am yours, and nothing in the world can change that. Arabella looked down at the ring on her finger, then up at the man who had placed it there. The man who had saved her from ruin, given her a home, and loved her despite every wall she had built around her heart. I still cannot quite believe it, she admitted. 3 months ago, I was a companion with no prospects, resigned to a life of service and solitude. Now you are the future Viscountess Thornbury. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed the ring he had just placed there. And I am the luckiest man in England. Possibly the maddest, she countered. You could have had anyone, any heiress, any diamond of the first water. Instead, you have chosen a woman who was invisible until you saw her. You were never invisible. His grey eyes held hers with fierce intensity. You only thought you were. The world failed to see your worth, Arabella. But that was the world's failure, not yours. From the moment I saw you standing up to Lord Vance, refusing to cower even when you were afraid, I knew you were extraordinary. I was terrified, she admitted. I know. That is what made your courage so remarkable. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely tender. You have spent your life believing you are not enough. I intend to spend the rest of mine proving you wrong. The engagement ball arrived 3 weeks later, transforming Ashworth House into a glittering wonderland of candlelight and flowers. Lady Agatha had outdone herself. Every surface sparkled, every corner overflowed with hothouse blooms, and the guest list had somehow expanded to 400, despite Sebastian's protests. Arabella descended the grand staircase on Sebastian's arm, her gown of ivory silk catching the light with every step. The sapphire ring gleamed on her finger, and around her throat hung a matching necklace, another gift from Sebastian, retrieved from the family vault and presented to her that morning with the simple words, "These belong to my mother. They should belong to my wife." The guests turned as they entered, a sea of faces ranging from curious to congratulatory two, in a few cases, openly envious. Arabella's gaze swept the crowd and caught, briefly, on one particular face, Lady Cordelia Ashby, standing near the windows with an expression of rigid composure. Their eyes met across the ballroom. Lady Cordelia raised her chin, a gesture that might have been acknowledgment or challenge. Arabella inclined her head in return, a gracious victor, not a gloating one. Whatever power Cordelia had once held over Sebastian was broken now. There was nothing left to fight for. "You are being remarkably gracious," Sebastian murmured in her ear. "She is not worth my anger." Arabella kept her voice equally low. She made her choices, and she must live with them. I, on the other hand, have you. I can afford to be generous. His laugh was quiet but genuine. "Remind me never to cross you, Miss Sinclair. Your mercy is almost more frightening than your wrath." "I believe you mean the future Lady Thornbury," she corrected. "And you would do well to remember it." The evening unfolded like a dream. They danced together for the first waltz, Sebastian's hand warm at her waist, the music swelling around them as they moved in perfect synchrony. They received congratulations from what felt like every person in London, endured Lady Agatha's increasingly elaborate toasts, and stole quiet moments in corners where the crush of guests temporarily thinned. But the moment Arabella would remember forever came near midnight, when Sebastian led her onto the terrace for a breath of fresh air. The spring night was soft and sweet, the gardens below them fragrant with early roses, the sounds of the ball muffled by the glass doors at their backs. "Happy?" Sebastian asked, drawing her close. "Terrified," she admitted. "Overwhelmed, incredulous, and yes, beneath all of that, happy. Happier than I have ever been." "Good." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I have spent 7 years building walls around my heart. You have demolished them in a matter of weeks. The least you can do is be happy about the destruction." She laughed, leaning into his warmth. "I shall endeavour to feel appropriately triumphant." "See that you do." But his voice had grown serious, and when she looked up at him, his grey eyes were soft with emotion. "I never thought I would have this, Arabella. Not after Cordelia. I convinced myself that love was a weakness, that I was better off alone. You have shown me how wrong I was." "We were both wrong," she said. "I thought I was unworthy of love. You thought you were incapable of it. We have spent years believing lies about ourselves." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I am glad we found the truth together." "So am I." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "So am I." The wedding took place 6 weeks later, on a golden morning in late June. Sebastian had wanted a small ceremony, family and close friends only, and for once Lady Agatha had not argued. "Some moments are too sacred for spectacle," she had declared. "Your wedding should belong to you and your bride, not to society." Arabella walked down the aisle of the small chapel at Thornbury Park, on her father's arm, her heart so full she could barely breathe. Her mother wept quietly in the front pew, overcome with joy at her daughter's unexpected fortune. Eleanor and Catherine stood as bridesmaids, their faces radiant. And at the altar, waiting for her with an expression that made her knees weak, stood Sebastian. He was wearing deep blue instead of his usual black, a concession to the occasion that made his grey eyes appear almost silver in the morning light. His dark hair was neatly combed, his jaw freshly shaved, his entire being focused on her with an intensity that made the rest of the world fall away. "Dearly beloved," the vicar began, but Arabella barely heard the words. She was too busy memorizing this moment, the weight of the flowers in her hands, the warmth of the sun through the chapel windows, the look in Sebastian's eyes as he watched her approach. When it came time to speak her vows, her voice was steady, despite the tears that threatened. "I, Arabella Elizabeth Sinclair, take thee, Sebastian Edward Ashworth, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. Sebastian's voice was equally steady, though she saw the emotion he was fighting to contain. I, Sebastian Edward Ashworth, take thee, Arabella Elizabeth Sinclair, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. The vicar pronounced them man and wife. Sebastian lifted her veil, his hands trembling slightly, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "My wife," he murmured against her lips. "My husband," she returned. And somewhere in the chapel, Lady Agatha was definitely crying. The wedding breakfast was held in the great hall of Thornbury Park, the ancestral home that Sebastian had worked so hard to save. Arabella looked around at the ancient stone walls, the portraits of Ashworth ancestors stretching back centuries, and felt a moment of pure wonder. This was her home now. These were her ancestors, or would be, once she bore children to continue the line. Children. The thought made her stomach flutter with anticipation and nerves. "You have gone very quiet," Sebastian observed, catching her hand under the table. "I was thinking about the future." "Good thoughts or worrying ones?" "Good." She squeezed his fingers. "I was thinking about children, yours and mine, running through these halls, terrorizing the servants, driving Lady Agatha to distraction." Sebastian's expression softened. "I would like that." "Very much." "How many?" "As many as God grants us." He lifted her hand to his lips. "Though I confess I find myself hoping for at least one daughter with copper hair and brown eyes, a little Arabella to wrap me around her finger, and a son with grey eyes and a tendency toward excessive solemnity, if you insist." His almost smile appeared. "Though I rather hope our children will be less solemn than their father. You will teach them to laugh, I think. And you will teach them to be steady and strong and fiercely protective of the people they love." She leaned in to kiss his cheek. "They will be the best of both of us." The celebration continued late into the afternoon, but eventually the guests departed, Eleanor and Catherine returning to London with Lady Agatha, and the great house fell quiet. Sebastian and Arabella stood on the terrace, watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the gardens in shades of gold and rose. "I have a gift for you," Sebastian said. "Another one? You have already given me your mother's jewels, a wardrobe that could clothe half of London, and a wedding that Lady Agatha assures me was tastefully restrained despite having 200 guests. This is different." He drew a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. "Open it." Arabella unfolded the document and found herself looking at a legal deed. It took her a moment to understand what she was reading: a property transfer, in her name alone, for a small estate in Hampshire, not far from her parents' home. "I do not understand," she said slowly. "It is yours, entirely yours, in your name, to do with as you please." Sebastian's voice was quiet. "I know that you came into this marriage with nothing, and that bothers you more than you admit. I wanted you to have something that was truly your own, something that does not depend on me or my title or my fortune. If anything should ever happen to me, you will have security that no one can take away." Arabella looked down at the deed in her hands, then up at the man who had given it to her. The man who understood, without being told, that she had spent her whole life feeling powerless and dependent. The man who had addressed that wound with the simple gift of independence. "You extraordinary man," she whispered. "How did I ever deserve you?" "I believe we have established that you deserve far more than you know." He drew her into his arms. but I intend to spend the rest of my life attempting to match your worth. It will take me decades at least. I will hold you to that promise. Please do." He kissed her, soft and sweet, as the sun finished its descent and the first stars began to appear. "Now, Lady Thornbury, shall we go inside? I believe we have a marriage to begin." She took his hand and let him lead her into their home, into their future, into the life she had never dared to dream. 8 years later, Arabella stood on the same terrace, watching 3 children race across the lawn in a shrieking game of chase. Thomas, the eldest at 7, had his father's dark hair and his mother's expressive eyes, a combination that made him both handsome and entirely too skilled at escaping punishment for his mischief. The twins, Rose and Victoria, were 5 years old and copper-haired terrors who had Lady Agatha wrapped firmly around their collective little fingers. "They will exhaust themselves before dinner," Sebastian observed, coming to stand beside her, "which means they will fall asleep at the table, and Cook will be offended that no one ate her roast." "Then Cook should not make such elaborate roasts on days when the children have been running wild since dawn." But Arabella was smiling as she said it, watching her son help one of the twins over a decorative hedge, while the other twin charged ahead toward the ornamental lake. "Victoria! Not near the water!" "I have her." Sebastian was already moving, his long legs eating up the distance between terrace and lake. He scooped Victoria into his arms just as she reached the water's edge, swinging her in a circle that made her shriek with laughter. Arabella watched them, her husband, her children, her family, and felt her heart swell with a love so vast it seemed impossible that her body could contain it. So much had changed in 8 years. Eleanor had married a Scottish baron and now lived in the Highlands, producing children with the same efficiency she had once applied to managing her brother's household. Catherine, after 3 seasons and countless unsuitable admirers, had fallen deeply in love with a second son who wrote poetry and had no fortune to speak of, and Sebastian, to everyone's surprise, had not only approved the match, but settled a generous sum on the young couple. Lady Agatha continued to hold court in London, dispensing advice and interference in equal measure. Lady Cheswick had passed peacefully in her sleep 2 winters ago, leaving behind memories of quiet kindness and a household that still missed her. And Arabella herself had transformed from a companion with no prospects to a Viscountess, a mother, and most importantly, a woman who finally believed she was worthy of the love she had been given. It had not always been easy. There had been difficult days, a miscarriage before Rose and Victoria, a fever that had nearly claimed Thomas as an infant, the endless small struggles of marriage and parenthood and managing an estate. But through all of it, Sebastian had been there, steady, strong, fiercely protective, just as she had known he would be. He returned to the terrace now, Victoria still giggling in his arms, Thomas and Rose trailing behind. "I believe we have reached the limit of outdoor adventure for today," he announced. "Thomas, take your sisters to nurse and tell her that Papa says they must wash before dinner, and that there will be no pudding for anyone who accidentally splashes water on the nursery floor." "Yes, Papa." Thomas took his sister's hands with the long-suffering patience of an eldest child and led them inside. Sebastian watched them go, his expression soft in a way that still made Arabella's breath catch after 8 years of marriage. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking that I am an absurdly lucky man." He drew her into his arms, heedless of any servants who might be watching through the windows. "I am thinking that I spent years convinced I would never have a family, a home, a wife who loves me despite my many flaws, and now I cannot imagine any other life." "You have very few flaws." "I have many flaws, which you have simply become too accustomed to notice." He kissed her forehead. "I am cold and stern, and entirely too rigid in my expectations. You are none of those things." Not anymore. She pulled back to look at him. You have changed, Sebastian. We have changed each other. Yes. His grey eyes, the same grey eyes she had fallen in love with at that long-ago ball, held hers with infinite tenderness. We have. They stood there in the fading light, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the distant sounds of their children's laughter from somewhere inside the house. The gardens stretched before them, immaculate and green. The house rose behind them, solid and enduring, and the future spread ahead, full of promise and possibility. "Do you remember," Arabella said softly, "the night we met, when you announced to Lord Vance that I was your fiancée? I remember every moment of that night, the terror in your eyes, the courage with which you faced him, the way my heart stopped when you placed your hand in mine." "I was so frightened," she admitted. "Not just of Lord Vance, but of you, of what your intervention might mean, what it might cost. And now? Now I am grateful." She smiled up at him. "Every day I am grateful that you chose to save a stranger, that you refused to let our pretense end when it might have, that you fought for me, even when I did not know how to fight for myself." "You always knew how to fight," Sebastian corrected. "You simply needed someone to show you that the fight was worth winning." He kissed her, slow and deep. "You showed me the same thing, you know. Before you, I had forgotten that some things are worth fighting for. You reminded me. Then we saved each other." "We did." He pulled back, and that full, genuine smile she had come to treasure broke across his face. "And I would do it all again, Arabella, every moment, every complication, every terrifying step into the unknown. I would do it all again, because it led me to you." "So would I," she whispered. "So would I." A small voice piped up from the doorway. "Mamma, Papa, Thomas says there will be no pudding, but I was very good and only splashed a little bit of water." They turned to find Victoria standing in the doorway, her copper curls damp and escaping from their ribbons, her expression a perfect blend of innocence and mischief. Sebastian laughed a full, rich sound that still made Arabella's heart skip and released her to scoop their daughter into his arms. "A little bit of water, you say? Well, that hardly counts at all. I believe exceptions can be made for little girls who were only a little bit naughty." Victoria beamed. "I knew you would understand, Papa." "Your father is entirely too soft on you," Arabella observed, but she was smiling as she followed them into the house. "All of you. I am surrounded by schemers and manipulators." "And you love us anyway," Sebastian said over his shoulder. "Yes," she agreed, watching her husband carry their daughter through the halls of their home, toward the dining room where their other children waited. "I love you anyway. I love you all more than I ever thought possible." And that, she reflected as they sat down to dinner together, 3 children. One husband, a lifetime of memories, and a future bright with promise, was the greatest unexpected gift of all. The love she had never believed she deserved had found her anyway. All because of one pretended engagement that neither of them had been willing to end.